Hey everyone, and welcome back. This is our second episode with the Nillion podcast, where we're bringing on founding entrepreneurs building in the Nillion ecosystem. And today we've got a very exciting project at Deepin. You may have heard of it before. We've got Deniz from Soarchain, and as usual, you have myself, Juan, and Lucas is your co-hosts on the Nillion side. So great to have you, Deniz.
Great to be here. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. We've been looking forward to this conversation for a little while now, and it lines up pretty perfectly with a few things we've got going on, which I know we'll cover in today's podcast. But maybe just as a starting point, give us a quick intro to yourself, how you got into crypto and the role Soarchain played in all of this.
Yep, definitely. So I'm Deniz. I'm the co-founder of Soarchain. Previously, I've been working on autonomous vehicles, both hardware and software aspects of these autonomous vehicles. I work with and for big automotive companies to enable autonomous technologies in their vehicles. I worked on this about 10 years since 2012, 13 years. And I've been in crypto in parallel since 2013, only as a trader, of course, until 2021 or so, where I've actually noticed there could be some synergies in between what I'm actually doing and the crypto aspect. What we've seen on the automotive industry was that a huge increase in the sensors and the software definition of these vehicles, and the data that is being generated by a vehicle increasing all the time. But there wasn't a way to utilize this data and also empower people to own this data so that they can actually leverage it for monetization purposes or benefiting out of the data through different applications. So this is how we started Soarchain, and we've been building it for about almost 3 years now. This is a bit of a summary.
Awesome. I mean, you touched on a key pillar here, which is obviously sharing information and enabling people to generate incomes, right, from potential data that's generated, particularly in your flow, which I would say is a key pillar of the trend and movement of Deepin more broadly, right? Deepin obviously trying to use the strengths of crypto incentive structures, coordination, the permissionlessness aspect and composability aspects of crypto to essentially create new income opportunities and sovereignty in physical infrastructure use cases that otherwise are siloed off and are not really accessible to the end users. And in your case, obviously, it's mobility specifically, right? Which I think is certainly one of the exciting sort of areas within Deepin, where telecoms has seen great success on some fronts. There's the mobility side. There are also much more broadly and high-level compute networks and storage networks, where the bootstrapping of those networks, obviously, with token incentives has been successful so far. But I personally actually find mobility particularly exciting and interesting because it's kind of a no-brainer to me that the data that you generate there could be valuable, right, for all sorts of different areas. And bringing back control of that data and enabling people to learn from that data, I think is an interesting sort of, philosophy and thing to think about. So can you maybe walk us through that a little bit more? I'm a user. I'm using the Soarchain platform. I use the mobile application. I have a device. What am I generating? What sort of data? And, why is that valuable?
Yeah, definitely. I also want to initially touch upon what you said first. You're exactly right. We've seen these wireless networks, energy networks, storage networks thrive through the Deepin logic, where you distribute the OPEX and CAPEX to the people and have a people-powered network, where otherwise you would have had a single operating company that probably couldn't have deployed all that infrastructure, or we call everything infrastructure here, of course. It doesn't have to be like an energy network or like a wireless network per se. In mobility's case, it could also be a data network. Infrastructure doesn't have to be stationary, obviously, and it could be data nodes that are generating data. So when you look at the Web 2, we've always seen this like companies are getting our data. I don't know, like Facebook and other companies, they're reading our data, selling our data without our knowledge, which was pretty straightforward business model for them. But ultimately, your data online didn't really have an intrinsic value to you because you wouldn't really get anything out of analyzing your data. You wouldn't really um, improve your health, or you wouldn't really reduce costs for that matter by analyzing your Web 2 data. But in mobility, it's like just the perfect use case because we have multiple aspects and multiple reasons to actually contribute your data to this network. So come back to your question. As a user, you basically get one of these Soarchain mini devices that plug into your vehicle. It has a secure element on it, and it starts querying your car's CAN bus and all the available data points. And then it creates a fingerprint of your car and the available data on your car and starts sending proofs to the network, which in themselves prove that your car is in fact healthy, providing data, and actually up and running and connected to the network. And ultimately, your data is very valuable in many aspects. First of all, it can be used in many applications that would be beneficial for the overall lifetime maintenance and servicing costs of your car, reducing these costs and increasing the lifetime of the car. So these are just like day one applications that could be done with your data. But also, there are some other third-party applications which many of these third-party companies are also interested in, such as like insurance, to give you a better insurance premium by analyzing your data. Maybe you're a very good driver, you're not really driving fast or reckless. You should have a much better premium than the person who would be driving recklessly. So this is just like a very straightforward example. Of course, there could be many other applications within this space, but ultimately this is why contributing to this ecosystem working and why it's valuable to many parties and how the network grows through this.
So just to summarize that for the audience and to check that I understand correctly, so basically what you're saying is traditionally, if I want to get insurance for, my driving behavior for my cars, obviously insurance firms look at all my track record across the board, right? And then sort of establish a premium on that, but they don't actually have any real driving data from me, right? All they have is all the other data points that in aggregate, right, sort of establish a certain risk premium that meet me. But what you're saying is now, by them having granular insight, not just into, all the other non-driving related factors, but into the actually driving related factors in terms of how often I drive, how much I accelerate every time, at what times I drive, etc. You're saying that if I'm a solid driver, if I'm driving within the rules, so to say, that it can actually reduce my premium that I pay when I try to get insurance, essentially, right? So what you're saying is not just could I earn potentially by having contributed my data, but I could also get a better deal when it comes to insurance in driving specifically. Is that accurate sort of summary?
Exactly. And it would be just much more granular. I mean, it wouldn't be your company updating your premium every year or so, or maybe every month or so, but they could even give you like live premiums because they could in fact access this data and even change your premium, reduce your premium if you've been driving really, really good for the past 8 hours or so. So that's possible.
Yeah, I actually really like this because this is actually almost like real-time incentive to drive correctly and appropriate, right? Because almost like if I'm accelerating beyond the limits, right, of driving speed limits, what you're saying, if I understand correctly, is that in real time, theoretically, my insurance number could go up that I have to pay, right? So in real time, as I accelerate further and drive too fast, it sort of captures that information and then feeds it into the algorithm that establishes how much I need to pay for my insurance, right? But if I reduce the speed, if I stay within the limits, and if I drive correctly, it also in real time, or at least within certain time frames, reduces that cost again. And it gives me almost like a real-time feedback loop, right? Of like, okay, I should do things correctly because that means I have to pay less insurance, right? And on top of that, it's not just that, it's also, I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, generally the data that I contribute is valuable in and by itself, not just for insurance firm, but for a wide range of actors, which means I could also get paid for it rather than just, paying potentially less for insurance. Is that a fair take?
Yes, exactly. Like it is said that an average vehicle's data is worth something between $200 up to $1,000 per year per car. So, and this is just like the face value of it, just the money that these companies are willing to pay to get a single vehicle's data. I'm not counting all the benefits that you would get by inputting your data to these beneficial apps and getting these insights on how you might drive, when you might change a part, where you might buy your gas, or where you might change your oil in a much discounted fee. Without counting all these, it just has a value to these companies between $200 up to $1,000. So this is essentially this before Soarchain, and actually before using decentralized technologies, decentralized ledger, and deepen approach, it wasn't really possible to tap into people's data streams. We worked with a lot of OEMs, a lot of car manufacturers from this space, and the automotive is fairly a closed ecosystem. These companies are trying to compete with each other, but they're also kind of like monopolized the whole ecosystem, so they're not allowing anyone else. And we were working with one of these huge OEMs to actually put this device in their vehicles. And we finished the project back in 2022 to integrate this technology in 2027 to their cars. And in between, in those 2 years, we've actually we were able to reach to more people than we would have ever reached with them in these 5 years. So what I'm trying to say is that people are ready for the change, and they are actually, the technology is accessible. It is a fairly simple technology on the hardware end, at least. And when we make this accessible to the people through a decentralized and a transparent system, it's a no-brainer for them.
So one thing that there's two things I want to touch on. The first one is, I think a lot of people are hearing this, and this is probably going to tie into the fact that, this is a Nillion podcast and we're privacy layer and you're working with us. But I'm sure a lot of people might be listening to this and saying, well, I've heard of, programs like this by insurance companies that are opaque and they misuse customer data. And actually, it looks like I'm gaining something by using it. But at the end of the day, I'm actually going to end up paying more because they're going to use my data against me, right? Not even necessarily for being a, reckless driver, but just because they're going to figure out a way to increase my premiums based on whatever I can give them. So my first question would be, how does this differ from some of these traditional insurance apps that exist today that track your driving behaviors? And what should people be aware of when we talk about, like, how can it be, a transparent, decentralized system, and how can it also be protecting user data and ensuring that you're actually a beneficiary of this and not a sort of victim of it, right?
Yeah, I completely understand that. That was actually something that I was also going to touch upon. Traditionally, you have these big companies, right? They even provide these little devices that you plug into your car. It pairs with an app, and it even counts the times you touch your screen and whatever crazy parameters they're tracking. The most problematic thing about this is that it's completely closed source, and it's not really, they don't tell you what to do, how to drive better, and they are just looking to increase your premium instead of benefiting you. In our case, by the way, this can be generalizable to any kind of application, not only insurance. this open ecosystem actually fosters multiple companies of the same type, of the same purpose, to come up with different offers, different ways of processing the data, different algorithms, different business models, so the people can choose which company they want to work with. And this is ultimately what we want to enable. But of course, one of the most important aspects to enable this is, of course, the privacy preservation, because once you provide your data to a company, they now have it, and they can actually even tweak the algorithm personalized to you that you can maybe never win. So that's like, it's obviously like it sounds like a conspiracy theory, but it's just like an edge example that signifies the importance of privacy preserving systems. And this is why we actually we are partnered up with Nillion, and the applications and the way that the users start using these applications should and always will include a privacy preserving layer. So just as an example, we have been working on this framework where the users would actually not reveal their data to these companies before starting to work with them. So imagine there are 5 companies, you want to get premiums from them, but you just don't want to reveal your data to them. So they would have to compute on your data without seeing it. They would have to run whatever algorithm they have on your data to actually give you a premium, which ultimately only you could even see. Not even the company would see the premium that they give, but they would just give you an encrypted premium. And you would get 5 encrypted premiums from these 5 different companies, decrypt them, and see whichever one suits you better. These premiums could also contain facts like, we process your data according to this, according to that, so that you can choose from. So ultimately, it all comes down to how valuable your data is, and why it's important to actually provide as minimal as possible in plain text form to other companies.
This is phenomenal, because really what it does is it levels the playing field, right? It makes it so that whoever you are buying something from doesn't have an edge over you because of the data that you voluntarily or involuntarily provided. My second question that I wanted to wrap that up with was, you talked about the price of a vehicle's data being between $200 and $1,000. Is that per year or total?
Yes. According to some McKinsey reports back in 2023, I guess.
If that's the price of it, so who are the buyers of that data outside of insurance companies, right? Because that's the main focus of the conversation so far. But who else would benefit from acquiring that data?
There are like many companies. It's initially OEMs, although like car manufacturers, you would think that they have access to their own vehicles, own fleets, own manufactured vehicles data, or at least somehow have a pipeline to make the data usable and benefit from it. But even the OEMs themselves don't have a data pipeline that would have a built-in incentive structure, have a transparent and immutable way of tracking all the contributions from the drivers. So OEMs are very interested in this data, and also they are very interested in other cars' data. So, okay, they might be like, Tesla is the best in this domain. Obviously, they're like a data, like software company, not like a car company. And even they do not have access to other vehicles' data, which they can benefit from. This goes for all the OEMs. Second, the tier 1 suppliers. We always think of car manufacturers as like single companies, but it's like a huge ecosystem where, as you go lower in tiers, the number of companies increase. Like, you have the electronics, and then the part manufacturers to those electronics manufacturers, etc., etc. And one of the biggest things in the automotive industry is that these lower tier companies do not have any visibility whatsoever into their products. And previous to Soarchain, we have been working with these car companies in a B2B fashion, where we also had a few clients from the tier one manufacturers, where they were manufacturing these brake pads and brake pad sensors. They were trying to assess the depreciation on their brake pads and the how good their sensors work, but they didn't really have a way to access that data. And even with the limited methods that they could access the data through the OEM just wouldn't give that data to them just in case it would be valuable or maybe sell it. So these tier one companies were ready to pay ridiculous amounts of money for just maybe 50 to 100 cars from the field for 3 months. Now they were getting into these multi-million-dollar agreements just for some pilot projects. Now they can actually have that data from thousands of cars as long as they want, much, much cheaper when you compare it to what they had before. So that's like another example. The like governments, municipalities, mapping companies, traffic flow, all companies related to traffic flow, improving traffic flow, they are also very interested in this data. And it can even go further to like advertisement, marketing, all these things. They also utilize a lot of this physical data from the cars. And ultimately, of course, I've mentioned like Web2 companies, or like, well, I will call these old economy companies. But ultimately, this will the ultimate buyer of this data will be the AI or an AI or multiple AI companies or multiple companies that have different AI approaches. And when you think about it, it's really interesting because the physical AI part really differs from the like digital AI or current AI systems, LLMs that we use, like ChatGPT and others, where they're using up data from the internet, which ends up getting simulated by other bots, where you hit a data wall and you cannot really get any actual data, and all you will get is synthetic data at some point, like this dead internet theory or something like that. But with physical data, you have a constant stream of actual sensor data coming from the real world, so it always gets updated. You don't have any problems with repeating data or data hitting a wall. So ultimately, the highest spend on this data would be from the AI domain.
Wow, there's a lot to unpack here. Thanks for sharing, all these different use cases, which all makes sense to me. I think what I like about it is it's quite clear for listeners probably to see why this data is valuable for the three different stakeholders that you just described, right? Like starting with, first of all, with company comparison. I love that because that's a great example of collaborative computation, right? Where different companies, different parties will love to understand how they compare against each other, but for legal reasons, for compliance reasons, for competitive reasons, they cannot and do not want to share plain text information about their customers or about sensitive business information, right? But if you can keep the data encrypted and nonetheless process it and comparably analyze it, then you have collaborative insights that are potentially really valuable, right? So I love that, which I think is brilliant example for privacy enhancing technologies, but also a brilliant example of data sharing and why privacy in this particular use case is so critical. The second one I think you mentioned was about different stakeholders in the supply chain currently not having insight into the underlying information. One, I think like we're back in what we were always saying, which is brilliant for, another example of data Legos, right? And open global permissionlessness and accessibility of the data. Right now it sits all in these silos. People don't really have access to it, but it's really valuable. And we need to find a way to break down those barriers. We really need to find a way to make this data accessible for a wide range of actors to use that information, because the use cases are so broad and so useful for this, right? So I love that. And then last but not least, on the AI side, I mean, as you said, today, Ilya is the most prominent example in December, saying we're running out of data, right? And we are running out of high quality data, I guess, public data to train the next generation models. What you're just describing here is basically a good use case, a good example of a lot of valuable data still being locked up, right? And instead of just focusing on synthetics, how can we get access to the data that's currently on the edge, that's currently with the user, that's currently with certain devices, that's sensitive, right? That people do not want to share publicly with one company or are not even allowed to share in plain text with others. And how can we introduce decentralized infrastructure and blind competition, privacy and technology specifically, to use that data without it being leaked in terms of its sensitive information being accessible to everybody, right? So I love those three use cases. And I think generally speaking, it's a great example of DeepIn really, I think, finding its path to something really tangible in the real world that I think everybody would understand, right? I think if you go to somebody who is not in crypto and you tell them that, look, company A wants to get access to this data because it's valuable because of X, Y, Z, and now we can enable to do so while still protecting the challenges that otherwise would occur in doing so, privacy and all these other things. It's a no-brainer why that's valuable, right? And I think that's what excites me with a lot of deep use cases and also specific mobility here in this case, because it is, I think, clear for people to visualize and clearly see why there could be a real use case here with a strong product market fit potential, right? So that's awesome. What I would love to learn more about is how much data is actually generated every day. Like I'm driving a car. How much is that? I have actually no idea.
I mean, like most of it goes to waste, or at least not to waste, but used within the car. But I'd say something between like 0.5 terabytes up to 4 terabytes right now is generated by the car itself. Of course, you would only be able to send so much through a metered network, like that you would have to pay for data. But still, there are ways to obviously like compress this data or discard the monotonous data, etc. But even after all those, you'd be looking at a couple of 100 megabytes of data per day. It depends on the vehicle. Like if you have a Tesla or if you have like a modern car with all these sensors and cameras, it goes up to terabytes easily. But even with like a medium segment modern car, you would get like a terabyte per day, and maybe 1 to 5% of this would be sent to a network because it's useful, or at least it would be deemed useful at some future time. But it is a lot. This is why actually we've also built this system. Like this data is especially important to the nearby vehicles, to the cloud or like other networks themselves. And ultimately, this is the amount of data we're dealing with.
It's really cool to see that, when people can come, and especially on this podcast, you're the second guest now, but it's very clear that this sort of rebuttal to I don't care about privacy because my data is worthless is just like simply not true, because the data actually has a very clear market price it fetches. So if you're not in control of your data and you don't own your data, then somebody else does, and they're making money off it, probably at your expense and to your detriment. So, before we get into how exactly you came across Nillion and what made you decide to start building on it and what that enables, we're talking about all the data that's generated by a car on a daily basis and on a yearly basis. Tell us a little bit about this campaign that you're rolling out, because by the time this podcast is published, it'll already have been announced. So would love to hear about this sort of geographical competition across different countries that you're running. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, definitely. So when we met Nillion team, it was basically like a perfect fit in terms of the use case, because we have been working with or like POCing privacy preserving systems from the start. And we knew that exactly as you said, the value of your data would be worth something if you actually owned it, rather than someone behind your back use it and monetize it. This had been the case, by the way. We all know these Facebooks and everything, but this is also the case in automotive. Mozilla, I think last year, published a report on 25 of the biggest automotive manufacturers and how they were actually snooping into your data, snooping into your private life, and there were some like crazy examples, like they were even able to track like sexual activity somehow from the data. So it was a mess, and they said that like, okay, we had this thing with the SaaS companies or like these social media companies, but the automotive is much worse. So that's where we said, okay, this privacy preserving should be like an out of the box feature and not like an optional thing on it. And so that's basically the reason we started working. Another thing is obviously the ease of use. So we've experimented with other privacy preserving systems initially. But ultimately you would have to either like scale your compute network a lot, which brings compute overhead, a lot of costs, and it's really impossible to scale and manage all those. Or it would be either too slow, or it would be just like not really practical for production use. So that's, I think, one of the biggest reasons that something like this partnership is even possible, because like this privacy preserving system is practically usable. You don't really see that a lot. And in terms of the competitions, there would be we will be deploying them on like multiple geographies, multiple continents, of course, according to the proportions of users that we have there. And there would be gamified features where people would be incentivized to drive better. People would be incentivized to behave differently, of course, in a good way. It all encourages good behavior. Or just some other metrics that we are collecting and in a privacy preserving way processing and creating a leaderboard out of it to make this like a privacy enhanced or like privacy enabled public leaderboard competition kind of thing. But yeah, Lucas, please feel free to also jump in on this one.
Yeah, no, I think it's awesome. I think it's a really cool gamification of privacy preserving technologies at the same time of real time driving behavior, right? Like, I would love to learn more about like the French versus the Spanish and how they compare in acceleration and who's driving crazier than the other, things like this, right? That's fun. I think that's a cool insight that at least I have never seen before, and I don't know if that ever exists, because how would it, right? If the data is locked up and siloed. But I think all of these insights are fun, and also at the same time very usable and interesting, as you said, right? To then be consumed by stakeholders and third parties that can actually directly commercially benefit from that, whilst obviously, as you said, enabling the users to get attribution from that, right? Earnings from that, and maintain sovereignty over that. So all of this is exciting. I think one thing to highlight as well that you said before, which is how do we change the ownership structure here and bring back control to the user, is if you sell your data, because there's two things, right? There's sovereignty, there's ownership, and then there's privacy. And ideally, you have both, right? Because you could arguably have sovereignty and then sell your data, and then the party has consumed the data. You were the owner. You actually earned money in that transaction, right? But once the cat is out of the bag, the cat is out of the bag, right? Once you sold your data, you may have earned from it now, and you were the owner in this scenario, but now the data is gone, right? And now you earn $10 or $100 or whatever it is, right? But now that other party can do with it whatever it wants to do with it. where I really think we are looking at a foundational pivot here and change in the way we think about monetization of data is once you combine sovereignty with privacy. Because once you combine sovereignty with privacy, you can keep your data private, make it accessible and usable, generate insights, but it always is private, which means there's not a one-off transaction and you earn money. You consistently can generate income because your data continuously remains valuable, right? And I think that's really the fascinating thing, because all of a sudden you have a consistent income stream because the data is valuable, it continues to be valuable, and you continue to generate valuable data without selling it once, then it's out of the bag, and then it has lost its value once, right? I think this is something that is really important also to emphasize, because yes, sovereignty is important, but once you combine sovereignty with privacy, I think that's where the magic starts to happen, right? So, and I think in your case, this is obviously about driving behavior. It's about me maintaining ownership of my data forever, basically, but still earn income and generate insights that third parties may want to get access to. So that's all really exciting stuff.
Yes, I agree completely.
I'd be curious, Deniz, given the composability aspect of it and what we've been talking about with the openness that you don't get with these sort of Web 2 closed source black box systems, are there any potential applications that could be built on top of Soarchain that you've thought about that would make you excited? Like what are some extensions of it, right? Some modular things that could be built on top of it.
Yeah, I mean, we're providing the infrastructure, obviously, and the value proposition is that you get access to plausible, integral, and authentic data, and also recent and current data. And anything that could be built on top of that, that would be beneficial for the people, or it could be just some data collection application, would be a really good use case. But what I'm really excited about, and this shorter term at least, is this future where you would be actually able to talk to your car data and ask questions about how you might be driving, how your car health is, and what could you done to extend your car lifetime, etc. All these things, because right now it's a bit disconnected. Like you might have some like bot or some assistant to talk to about general stuff about cars, or like ask questions about cars. But it's really interesting when you start talking to your data, and of course, without actually having your data sent to someone else's server and stored there in a plain text manner. So I think that's one of the things which excites me the most. It kind of is a straightforward application. It's a simple application, but having it in a privacy-preserving manner and through AI agents is a very exciting future, in my opinion.
Yeah, I guess I was just trying to get to like the specific data points out of curiosity. What is data you're actually collecting? Like, what is it? What are the details that it tells us? What are the different parameters?
So there are there's a common set of data that we're collecting from cars that are manufactured after 2004. It's almost 95% of these cars worldwide. And there's a set of data points that are mostly related to emissions tests. This is actually the exact reason that we're able to collect these data from this many cars, because they have to comply with these emissions regulations. So we are able to access the speed, acceleration, pedal position, braking, engine temperature, engine RPM, engine air intake, everything that you would actually need to calculate things like efficiency, how a person is driving, and anything that you can imagine from all these data. On top of this, as cars get more modern, they tend to expose more and more data points. It could be like the seat, who's sitting on a seat, or which windows are open. In Teslas, it's like the amount of data points are crazy, like whether it's in like Sentry mode, whether the AC is on, whatever the configuration of the AC is, like you have all these hundreds of data points. And also it's similar in many other EVs. And also EVs come with their own battery related information, which you also have tens of, maybe hundreds of data points, like EV charge, all the cell charges, state of charge, the time it takes to charge to 50%, etc. All these data points we are able to get from the car. And one of the things is, of course, we aren't, like, the Soarchain network itself is not reading all these data points in plain text and sending them to the network or the blockchain itself. We're just creating the proof that this data exists on this car and is being generated from the car by this car. And through the secure element and cryptographic accelerator chip inside the device, we sign it and create a proof out of this and send that, okay, this is the proof that this car is able to generate these data. And what this means to the data requesters or data users is that they would have a catalog or like a registry of cars, which registered to this database, and they are able to pick from all these data points. And we have this system called data provision request, where you send an on-chain request, a special kind of transaction to the chain, where you ask for, let's say, tire pressure data from 10,000 cars from Germany, and for 3 months. All the eligible cars in the network gets notified. And if, as a user, you opt in to provide your data, only then your data gets streaming to the data requester. So that it's completely in an opt-in based, and the daily operations, or like the daily data collection, is actually completely up to the user. So they might just not want to participate in these data provision requests, and they just wouldn't get further monetized, but they would still be rewarded by the network just for being healthy and potentially data providing node to the system. And ultimately, the network rewards that we're initially providing as incentives to grow the network would drop, and the data provision requests would be the way to actually monetize your data, which we envision would be the most straightforward and logical way to do this.
Okay, so just from a technical perspective then, to bring, I think, also the audience on the same page, because there's a lot of stuff going on. There's proof verification, there's blind computation, there is blockchain, right? So on a very high level, the way the flow would work, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm a driver, I have the Soarchain device, I'm generating that data, I generate a proof locally, or potentially there is a runner node, I think, that you have that would generate that proof, sort of establish the importance of that information. But what all that ends up on chain is that proof, but the actual raw data is either going to blind computation networks, so where the data is actually privately stored, and there is no third party that has access to the information other than the user, who is the owner of that information, that can determine who can read and write to that data. Or alternatively, blind computation wasn't used, then it would obviously go in encrypted form in transit to a Soarchain's backend, and would be stored there, processed there. But in usage of blind computation, that data would be in Nillion's network. It would be privately preserved there, and then accessible if users want to do so, for third parties to be queried, for third parties to be analyzed, but without actually leaking the information. Whilst the proofs sit on chain, but the data actually sits out off chain on the Nillion network, so to say, right? That's sort of the way users can think about, I think, the flow. Is that accurate?
Yes, exactly.
Awesome. Great. I mean, I guess like one question I would have is you touched on a lot of different areas. You touched on AI agents. You touched on, manufacturers. You talked on sort of different stakeholders in the supply chain that might generate insights into some of the data that they currently don't have access to. Who do you think in the short term is the party that is most interested in the information? Who is the one that needs the data the most and is willing to pay the most out of all these stakeholders?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably, again, someone who would have to, who's desperately in need of this data to improve and like advance their R&D efforts and improve their products. I can only think of three main things. One would be, again, the OEMs and their suppliers, and the physical AI companies. So that's, I think, where all like the biggest of the three spenders will be on physical data.
That's awesome. And I mean, just from an end user's perspective, right? If someone's listening to this and they're like, wow, okay, this sounds awesome. How do I get started? Like, what's the actual flow, right? From ordering the device to installing it to anything else you have to consider. What's the explain it like I'm 5 version?
Actually, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. You order the device, unbox it, plug it into your vehicle, bind it with the mobile app, and connect to the Soarchain network and start using it. There will be this specific hardware is now dependent on the mobile app itself, because the mobile app and the phone also has some features and very valuable data that can also be utilized even outside of the mobility scope, which we are also working to bring. But it's pretty simple like that. And also we are rolling out a new model which will not necessitate the mobile app or the phone. It will run through LTE and you will just be able to forget it. It's mostly targeting fleets because you would then have to have some kind of LTE subscription and whatnot. But still, the amount of data that is being sent is much more valuable than that data. So it's pretty straightforward for the users right now.
That makes sense. Is your first group of, let's call them early adopters, would you say they're crypto native users, or what's your target audience here? At least in the early days.
Yeah. That's a good question, actually. Initially, we had some like crypto native users, but then interestingly, we had some like car enthusiast crowd come in. And finally, we have all the Deepin people who are also contributing to many other projects. They've been like mining Helium, HiMapper, all the other projects. So they were also very interested in Soarchain. But of course, currently, we're not even at 1% yet. So this age-old question of like, what's going to bring the next billion users to crypto or whatever, I think that like it has to be the next billion users should not really know that they're using a crypto or like a blockchain product to be able to come to crypto. Like, and this, in my opinion, could be a perfect opportunity to actually onboard those people, because there are more than 1 billion cars around the world, and this is just only the cars. Like the commercial larger vehicles are not counted, the two-wheelers are not counted. This can actually bring more than 1 billion people to crypto without them even knowing it. But of course, that all depends on the UX and nothing else, basically, that we as Soarchain or all the crypto projects would offer to these people. So it all comes down to how easy to use and also how beneficial it is to the people.
I'm excited to see more people start to kind of realize that, they are sitting on valuable data, right? And either it's not being tapped into and they're not benefiting from it, or again, like we've said several times, it's being tapped into by someone other than themselves, right? This seems like a very clear use case for it. Where, I mean, if you are in a city that requires you to drive and commute to work and go to the supermarket, whatever it is, you're basically generating data on a daily basis, whether you realize it or not. So might as well tap into it. And, we're really excited to have you guys building on Nillion. It's like I said, perfect use case, and we're excited to see where this is headed. So I think we're coming up at the top of the hour here. Is there anything else either of you want to touch on before we wrap up?
No, I think that's perfect.
Okay. Well, Deniz, pleasure having you on. Hopefully we can do it again in the near future, after Nillion's mainnet launch coming up soon. And otherwise, thanks for your time, and catch you guys soon.
Thanks for having me. Catch you.
Thanks.